Hey heroes, welcome to another supernatural episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below along with other places you can find me. Previously on History of the Marvel Universe. After the Great Cataclysm failed to eliminate the wickedness of mankind, God created the Spirits of Vengeance, flaming warriors tasked with punishing the guilty. The spirits joined forces with a group of immortal sorcerers called the Blood and aided them in their battle against the demon Zarathos. Sacrificing themselves, the spirits sealed Zarathos' essence inside a medallion of power along with their own, forever intermingling them. The medallion was then shattered and hidden within the spiritual bloodline of the Kale family. Zarathos was later resurrected by a corrupt Native American mystic but was defeated and enslaved by the Hell Lord Mephisto. To accomplish this, Mephisto allied with the prince of a neighboring tribe and claimed his soul. In the 18th century, Mephisto made a deal with the corrupt pastor Destin Kale, transforming his son Noble into a Ghost Rider using the medallion shard embedded in his soul. After that, the spirit of Noble Kale inhabited the bodies of his descendants, transforming the firstborn of each generation into a spirit of vengeance. The curse was passed down to Naomi Kale, who sought to protect her own firstborn son, Johnny Blaze, at the cost of her own life. Her youngest children, Danny and Barbara, were adopted by the Ketch family, and after the death of his father, Johnny was taken in by Crash and Mona Simpson, later starting a relationship with her daughter, Roxanne. When Crash was diagnosed with terminal cancer, Johnny made a deal with Mephisto to cure him, but Crash nonetheless lost his life in an ill-fated motorcycle stunt. As a result of the deal, Johnny Blaze was merged with the demon Zarathos and transformed into a Ghost Rider. And that is where this week's tale begins. Initially, Blaze's personality was more dominant while transformed, and he used the Ghost Rider identity to battle evil and injustice. Meanwhile, as Johnny Blaze, he continued his career as a stunt cyclist, although his relationship with Roxanne was soon tested. Still under the guise of the biblical Satan, Mephisto wanted to claim Blaze's soul. However, Roxanne Simpson had already cast a holy spell that protected Johnny from the devil, and so Mephisto used a number of tricks to manipulate both Blaze and Roxanne. Notably, he fooled Roxanne into believing that he had claimed her father's soul and was keeping him in hell. Using this false leverage, he was able to force Roxanne to renounce her protective spell. When Satan again tried to take Blaze's soul, he was seemingly stopped by a Christ-like figure who, when asked, identified himself simply as a friend. Although it was later revealed that this so-called friend was not truly Jesus Christ, but rather another manipulation tactic concocted by Mephisto to lull Blaze into a false sense of security by making him think that he'd been saved by divine intervention. Furthermore, Roxanne was left with the guilt of betraying Johnny and left him after learning that the devil never actually had her father's soul. As for why Mephisto didn't simply steal Johnny's soul when he ostensibly had the chance, well, that does make sense when you consider that, as we mentioned the last time, the descendants of Noble Kale were granted protection by the angel Uriel, preventing Mephisto from harming them directly. In any event, Johnny continued fighting evil as the Ghost Rider and befriended a number of other heroes, even becoming a founding member of the Los Angeles-based super team, the Champions. That's where he met the wealthy mutant Warren Worthington, aka the Angel. Around this time, Johnny found work at Delazny Studios, where the masked adventurer Stuntmaster was starring in his own TV show. While there, Blaze started a brief romance with Stuntmaster's co-star Karen Page. However, this quickly got complicated when he learned that Karen's stunt double, Katie Milner, was actually Roxanne Simpson, who had been possessed and transformed by one of Mephisto's demons. Furthermore, his double identity was exposed to his co-workers when the sorceress Dr. Druid sensed the demonic presence inside him and attacked, forcing him to transform. While this revelation wasn't widely publicized, Blaze hit the road, leaving both Roxanne and Los Angeles behind. In the midst of all of this, Zarathos slowly exerted more and more control over the Ghost Rider's actions. At one point, they were briefly separated by the wizard Azaziah, who sought to usurp Zarathos' power, but this ultimately failed and the two were joined together once again. Johnny's stunt riding career continued to suffer, and he ultimately lost the title of world champion to his younger rival, Flagg Fargo. Sometime after that, he returned to the Quentin Carnival, where his father worked as a daredevil until he met his end. While memories of his early childhood were fuzzy at best, Johnny soon came to regard the carnival as a place where he felt at home. While he was staying there, the demon Asmodeus came to Mephisto and offered to take command of Zarathos. Intrigued, Mephisto proposed a contest in which Zarathos would run a gauntlet of Asmodeus's design. If he failed to reach the end, Mephisto would relinquish control of the Ghost Rider to Asmodeus. To accomplish this, the Ghost Rider was summoned to Hell, and once again Johnny Blaze was separated from Zarathos. Mephisto declared that if Blaze and Zarathos could work together to escape Hell, they would remain separated and both would be free. The two did indeed manage to reach the portal back to Earth, but at the last moment Blaze and Zarathos betrayed each other. Fearing that they could be joined again on Earth, each one tried to force the other to remain in Hell. In the ensuing scuffle, they tumbled through the portal, and ironically, it is because of this conflict that they were once again joined together. In the end, they couldn't work together peacefully and would continue to struggle for control over their combined form. During this time, another foe they faced was Centurius, the man without a soul. If you recall from last time, Centurius was the Native American prince who Mephisto used as a pawn to enslave Zarathos 2,000 years prior. Rendered both unfeeling and unaging when the devil claimed his soul, Centurius slowly lost his humanity over centuries of life, going mad as he tried and failed to replace what he'd lost, leading to his initial encounter with the Ghost Rider. Meanwhile, after being separated from Johnny once again, Roxanne Simpson left LA and traveled to the Midwest to stay with her extended family in the town of Holly. Things were peaceful there, but one day the town pastor, Ethan Domblue, started making strange proclamations during his sermons and called himself the Sin Eater. More and more of the townsfolk submitted themselves to the Sin Eater's absolution ceremony, which allegedly cleansed them of evil, but in truth was sealing their essence inside an artifact called the Crystal of Souls. Roxanne, having had plenty of experience with the occult, could tell that the powers at play were more hellish than divine, and returned to the Quentin Carnival to ask Johnny Blaze for help. In the end, it turned out that the Sin Eater was an agent of Centurious, who was using the situation to lure in the Ghost Rider and trap Johnny in the Crystal of Souls. Zarathos remained in Blaze's body, but without a human soul to tether him, the Ghost Rider grew steadily weaker. Nonetheless, he ultimately succeeded in summoning enough demonic might to split the crystal open, freeing the trapped spirits within while pulling Centurius's soulless body inside. As the crystal resealed itself, trapping Centurius, Blaze returned to his body and immediately resumed fighting Zarathos for control. However, Roxanne convinced Johnny to stop struggling as they had come up with a plan. Having been betrayed by Centurius and left for dead, the Sin Eater used his soul-stealing powers to pull Zarathos' spirit into the crystal so that the demon could continue to take vengeance on his ancient enemy. The Sin Eater passed away, overcome by the spiritual energies, but in his final moments knew peace. Johnny Blaze, meanwhile, was finally separated from Zarathos and freed from the curse of the Ghost Rider. With the generous financial support of his former champion's teammate Warren Worthington, see, there was a reason I mentioned him specifically, Blaze married Roxanne, bought the Quentin Carnival, and had 2 children, Emma and Craig. A happy ending for Johnny Blaze, but of course the story doesn't actually end here. As explained in the previous video, Johnny had 2 younger siblings he was unaware of. When they were children, Barbara and Daniel were taken in by the Ketch family in Cypress Hills, and grew up not knowing they were adopted. Shortly afterwards, their adoptive father was killed in an armed robbery, and so Frances Ketch raised Barb and Danny with the help of her best friend, Cassie Dolan. Cassie later passed away from cancer, but her husband, police officer Arthur Dolan, continued to be a friend to the family. Young Danny befriended Dolan's daughter, Stacy, and developed a crush on her in their teenage years before the two started dating. Now, as we discussed in detail last time, Barbara and Danny's birth mother, Naomi Cale, was the latest in a line of Ghost Riders, whose transformations were sparked not by a demon, but the spirit of their ancestor, Noble Cale. While Naomi used magic to protect Johnny from this curse, leading to Mephisto's use of Zarathos to achieve a similar result, she unknowingly allowed the duty to be passed on to her next child, Barbara. After Naomi's death, she and her motorcycle were buried in an unmarked grave just outside the grounds of a Cypress Hills cemetery. That spot became the site of Gallagher's junkyard, which bordered the cemetery, and as fate would have it, also became the resting place for the Medallion of Power that briefly transformed another man, Max Parrish, into a Ghost Rider. The next part of our tale truly begins one Halloween Eve when Barbara Ketch convinced her brother to join her on a walk through the neighboring graveyard. Hearing a gunshot echoing from the scrapyard, they investigated and came upon a standoff between the Kingpin's men and the masked supervillain Deathwatch. Upon witnessing Deathwatch snap a man's neck with his bare hands, Barbara unwittingly let out a scream that alerted the criminals to their presence. Deathwatch ordered his men to fire on Barbara with their crossbows, striking her in the chest with an arrow. Under cover of darkness, Daniel quickly whisked his injured sister away, taking her to a cavern composed of scrapped vehicles. Little did he realize that this was the exact spot where Naomi Cale was buried, and the same spot where the Medallion of Power waited. There in the darkness, Daniel Ketch noticed a suspiciously pristine, unearthed motorcycle with a mysteriously glowing gas cap. He propped Barbara against it and tried to staunch her wounds, but had little success as the criminals slowly closed in. Then it happened. With his hands wet and sticky from his sister's blood, Daniel Ketch placed his palm against the Medallion of Power that had transfigured itself into the gas cap of their mother's motorcycle. Because of this combination of circumstances, Daniel inadvertently activated his family curse and transformed into a spirit of vengeance. He had become the next Ghost Rider. Bursting forth, he protected Barbara from Deathwatch's men and rescued a hostage they'd taken from a gang of youths called the Cypress Pool Jokers. The police soon arrived and the Ghost Rider pointed out that Barbara needed medical attention. Of course, the cops were more interested in trying to arrest the skull-faced hero. Displaying impressive strength, the rider flipped one police car onto another with a single hand before riding off and disappearing into the night. Fortunately, the authorities did call an ambulance that brought Barbara to a hospital, although she arrived in critical condition and fell into a coma. After that, Dan kept the bike, initially needing it to trigger his transformations. Similar to Blaze's early days, Dan Ketch used the Ghost Rider powers to battle criminals, but of course his focus was on tracking down Deathwatch and his minions. Notable among them was Blackout, a vampire-like mercenary whose face was burned when he tried to bite the Ghost Rider. During this time, he employed a power that even Blaze didn't know about, although all Ghost Riders are capable of, the Penance Stare. By looking into the eyes of a guilty soul, he could force them to experience all of the pain and sorrow they had ever inflicted in a single moment. Meanwhile, media coverage of this new Ghost Rider was highly critical, equating him to lethal vigilantes like the Punisher. This was in large part due to a smear campaign perpetrated by journalist Linda Way, who was secretly working for Deathwatch. Of course, her accusations were bolstered by an actual instance of the Ghost Rider working with the Punisher when the two vigilantes opposed the terrorist group Ultimatum and their leader, Flag Smasher. There were also times when he teamed up with more traditional superheroes, like when he formed a makeshift Fantastic Four with Spider-Man, Wolverine, and the Hulk. Although things hit a turning point when Blackout learned the Ghost Rider's secret identity and murdered Barbara Ketch in her hospital bed. That night, a traumatized Dan let his rage loose in a battle with another murderous criminal, the Scarecrow. The Ghost Rider seemingly killed the Scarecrow, impaling him on his own pitchfork, but for the full story there you can see my video on the Scarecrow himself. In the meantime, those familiar with the previous Ghost Rider took notice of this new one and suspected that Zarathos had escaped. Dan Ketch first learned of Zarathos when the dream demon Nightmare pulled the Ghost Rider into his realm where he could separate Daniel from the Spirit of Vengeance. While the spirit could not remember his life as Noble Kale, he knew that he wasn't Zarathos. Noble and Daniel re-merged and escaped, only to come face to face with Dr. Strange, who'd made similar assumptions. In this case, the two joined forces against another demonic threat and parted ways as allies. But of course, the most important person to believe that Zarathos had returned was John Blaze, and he had no intention of letting the demon roam free. Armed with little more than a shotgun and his arcane knowledge, Blaze hopped his bike and traveled to New York. After frightening some young delinquents, he tracked down Daniel Ketch and held him captive in a hotel room. Dan begged Blaze to let him go as Blackout was still on the loose and killing people. Dan eventually succeeded in summoning his bike and transforming, but when he did, Blaze cast a binding spell meant to trap the demon in a pentagram. However, that ritual was unable to hold this Ghost Rider, who grabbed Blaze's shotgun, inadvertently channeling Mystic Hellfire through the weapon and into John's body. Blaze was uninjured by this, but soon found that this had affected the weapon, allowing him to shoot blasts of hellfire from it. With a seemingly endless supply of ammunition, he soon overwhelmed the Ghost Rider, who was actually susceptible to the mystical assault. Blaze had the rider on the ropes and pressed the barrel of the gun against his skull. But then, just for a moment, he paused, hesitated, wondered what would happen to Daniel if he killed the being that he thought was Zarathos. That was enough of a respite for the rider to knock Blaze away and make his escape. As the Ghost Rider, Daniel tracked Blackout to Central Park with John Blaze hot on his heels. However, Blaze started to see his mistake when the rider saved a young woman from Blackout, pulling the vampiric killer away and holding him while demanding that John blast them both, which he ultimately did. With Blackout horribly scarred but still alive, the Ghost Rider began beating him to death, but Blaze, not wanting to send another soul to Mephisto, demanded that he stop. When Dan acquiesced, Blaze tentatively accepted that this Ghost Rider was not Zarathos, although given the resemblance he was still somewhat skeptical. The police arrived soon thereafter as the rider escaped, and Blackout was taken into custody. After that whole ordeal, Blaze decided to stick around and watch over Daniel as a protector and mentor. Over the next several weeks, Blaze taught Dan how to fight and passed on some of his knowledge about motorcycles. Although he did eventually return to his family while Dan continued his crusade against Deathwatch. Over the course of these events, Daniel learned that Deathwatch was not human, but an other-dimensional demon, and so when things eventually culminated in a battle between the two, the Ghost Rider stabbed the demonic villain with his mystic chain, seemingly killing him. But while Daniel Ketch finally had his vengeance for what happened to Barbara, other evils were lurking in the shadows. Unbeknownst to either Ketch or Blaze, Centurius had escaped from his prison in the Crystal of Souls. Rendered amnesiac, he became a power broker and put together an organization known simply as the Firm, which was largely run by a man named Stern. Taking an interest in the Medallion of Power, the Firm freed Blackout from prison, partially reconstructed his face, and tasked him with capturing the Ghost Rider. However, in the ensuing conflict, the bloodthirsty Blackout bit and grievously wounded Daniel before he could transform. Ketch died and would have stayed dead if not for the fact that the Ghost Rider was finally able to inhabit his body and transform without touching the medallion. Now in full control, the Spirit of Vengeance defeated Blackout once again and locked him in a nearby mausoleum. The Cypress Pool Jokers, who he'd previously saved from Blackout's gang, helped him avoid the police, but the Rider knew that he couldn't shift back to human form without killing Daniel. Hoping that there was some way to save his host, the Rider decided to visit the one man who might be able to help, John Blaze. He traveled to New Orleans to find him, and while he was there, he got caught up in a battle between the X-Men and their parasitic alien enemies, the Brood. Fortunately, Blaze arrived on the scene in time to help defeat the Brood Queen and end that invasion. Blaze listened to the rider's explanation of what had happened while accompanying him back to New York, much to his wife's chagrin, but unfortunately he did not have a solution he could offer. In any event, their search for an answer was soon put on hold as a new threat appeared on the horizon. An ancient mother of demons known as Lilith, who wished to tear open the walls between dimensions. To combat this threat, a new team would have to come together, one assembled by the Ghost Rider and Blaze. So let me know in the comments if you'd like me to continue this series, and perhaps in the future we'll come back and discuss the rise of the Midnight Suns. In the meantime, that is all I have for you this week, and thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week. And so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!